The call came on a Tuesday morning, interrupting my usual coffee and emails routine. When I saw Rebecca's name flash across my screen, I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. It never was with her. "Hello, Rebecca," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "I've sold the house," she announced without preamble, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "The papers are signed, and the new owners move in next week. I hope you've learned your lesson about respecting your elders." My name is Olivia Matthews, and the house Rebecca was so smugly talking about was my childhood home. The one my father had left me when he passed away 2 years ago. Or at least, that's what Rebecca thought. "The house?" I repeated, fighting to keep the amusement out of my voice. "You mean Dad's house?" "Don't play dumb, Olivia. You know exactly which house. The one you've been squatting in rent-free since your father died." "Well, that ends now. I found buyers who will actually appreciate the property." I took a slow sip of my coffee, remembering the meeting I'd had with Dad's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, just days after the funeral. Rebecca had no idea about that meeting, about the documents we'd signed, or about the real ownership of the property. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "And you're sure everything's legal?" She scoffed. "Of course it's legal. I'm his widow, and the house was in his name. You may have been his precious daughter, but I have rights too. Maybe next time you'll think twice before questioning my decisions about the remodeling." There it was. The real reason behind this power play. 3 months ago, I'd stopped Rebecca from gutting the house's historic features: the hand-carved banisters, the original hardwood floors, the stained glass windows my father had lovingly restored over the years. She'd wanted to modernize everything, to erase every trace of the home my father had created. "I see," I said. "Well, I hope you got a good price for it." "Don't worry about the price," she snapped. "Just make sure you're out by next Friday. The new owners are eager to start their renovations." I could almost see her smirking, imagining me scrambling to pack up and move out. If only she knew. "Thanks for letting me know," I replied. "Goodbye, Rebecca." As I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. Rebecca had always underestimated me, just as she underestimated my father's foresight. She thought she knew everything about our family's affairs, but there was so much she didn't understand. I picked up my phone again and dialed Mr. Harrison's number. "Olivia," he answered warmly. "I was expecting your call." "She did it," I said. "She actually tried to sell the house." "Did she now?" I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Well, this should be interesting. Would you like me to set things in motion?" "Yes, please. And Mr. Harrison, make sure the buyers understand exactly what's happening. I don't want innocent people caught in Rebecca's mess." After hanging up, I walked through the house, my house, running my hand along the walls my father had painted, the door frames he'd restored, the window seats where we'd spent countless hours reading together. Every inch of this place held memories, stories, pieces of our life together. Rebecca had married my father 5 years ago, when I was 23. At first, she played the part of the caring stepmother perfectly, all smiles and sweet words. But after the wedding, her true colors started showing. She tried to drive a wedge between Dad and me, made snide comments about our close relationship, and constantly pushed to change things about our home. Dad saw through her eventually, but by then his health was failing. In his final months, he called me into his study one evening while Rebecca was at her weekly spa appointment. "Livy," he'd said, using his old nickname for me, "I need you to trust me. Things aren't what they seem with Rebecca, and I've made arrangements. When the time comes, go see James Harrison. He'll explain everything." I'd wanted to ask more questions, but Dad had been so tired, so weak. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Rebecca had barely waited until after the funeral to start asserting her authority over the house and everything in it. She'd moved my father's belongings into storage, redecorated rooms without consulting me, and made it clear that she considered herself the sole owner of the property. What she didn't know was that my father had seen this coming. The meeting with Mr. Harrison had revealed just how carefully Dad had planned everything. The house, despite appearances, had never been in his name alone. Through a series of legal maneuvers I didn't fully understand, he protected it, and me, from exactly this kind of situation. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "I expect the keys on my desk by Thursday. Don't make this difficult, Olivia." I smiled, typing back, "Don't worry, Rebecca. Everything will work out exactly as it should." She didn't respond, probably thinking she'd won. But the real show was about to begin. and I had front row seats to watch her carefully constructed plans fall apart. My father had always told me that patience was a virtue. Sometimes he'd say the best response is to simply wait and let people reveal their true nature. Well, Rebecca had certainly revealed hers. Now it was time for her to learn about mine. I spent the rest of the morning going through some old photos I'd found in Dad's study. There was one of us working on the house together, covered in paint and sawdust but grinning like fools. Another showed us in the garden he planted, surrounded by the roses he'd lovingly tended. Rebecca had wanted to dig up those roses last spring, claiming they were old-fashioned. I'd stopped her then, just as I was about to stop her now. My phone rang again. Mr. Harrison. "The wheels are in motion," he said. "The buyer's lawyer has been notified of the situation. They're understandably upset with Rebecca, but relieved they found out before money changed hands." "How long until she finds out?" "I'd say by this afternoon. Their lawyer is drafting a strongly worded letter as we speak. Would you like me to be present when she receives it?" I thought about it for a moment. No, I decided. Let her deal with it alone. She needs to understand exactly what she's done. As you wish, but Olivia, be prepared for the fallout. People like Rebecca don't take humiliation well. He was right about that. Rebecca had always been proud, always needed to be in control. Finding out that she tried to sell a house she had no right to, that she'd made a fool of herself in front of potential buyers, it would hit her hard. But then again, that was exactly the point. The fallout came faster than I expected. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone exploded with notifications, multiple missed calls, and increasingly furious texts from Rebecca. "What AVU do you want?" The last message read, all caps conveying her rage. I was sitting in the garden among my father's roses when she pulled into the driveway. Her Mercedes screeched to a halt, and she stormed out, waving what I assumed was the lawyer's letter. "You conniving little witch," she screamed, her carefully maintained facade cracking completely. "You knew about this all along." I remained seated, calm despite her fury. Knew about what, Rebecca? Don't play innocent with me. She thrust the letter in my face. "The trust, the property transfer, all of it. You and James plotted this behind my back." "No," I corrected her gently. "Dad and Mr. Harrison arranged it. I just followed his instructions." Her face contorted with rage. "Your father would never do this to me. This has to be a mistake." Actually, I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans. "Dad did exactly this to protect both me and the house. He saw through you, Rebecca. He knew exactly what you tried to do after he was gone." She took a step back, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft garden soil. "That's impossible. He trusted me. He loved me." "Did he?" I asked quietly. "Or did he just let you think he did?" The color drained from her face as the implications of my words sank in. My father, the man she thought she fooled completely, had outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave. The house was never in his name. I continued, watching her process each revelation. "He transferred it to a trust years ago, long before he met you. I'm the sole beneficiary. You had no right to try to sell it." "You're lying," she whispered, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Check the property records," I suggested. "They're all public. Dad made sure of that too. He wanted everything to be transparent when the time was right." Rebecca's hands were shaking now, crumpling the lawyer's letter. "The buyers, they're threatening legal action. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Almost as humiliating as trying to throw your stepdaughter out of her own house." I countered. "Or maybe as humiliating as spending years pretending to care about someone just to get their money." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "You don't understand anything about my relationship with your father." "I understand more than you think. Dad told me everything before he died, about the prenup you refused to sign, about the mysterious withdrawals from his accounts, about the men you met with while he was in the hospital." Her eyes widened. "He knew. He knew everything, Rebecca. He just waited, watched, and planned. Like father, like daughter, I suppose." She took another step back, her expensive suit now stained with garden dirt. "This isn't over," she threatened, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it is," I replied, pulling out my phone. "I've recorded this entire conversation. Would you like me to add it to the file Mr. Harrison is building about your attempts to illegally sell property you don't own?" For the first time since I'd known her, Rebecca was speechless. She stood there, surrounded by my father's roses, looking completely lost. I'll make this simple, I said. Leave. Leave the house, leave me alone, and most importantly, leave my father's memory alone. If you try anything else, any more schemes, any more attempts to take what isn't yours, everything comes out. The affairs, the money, all of it. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. It would damage your precious father's reputation. I smiled, channeling the same quiet strength I'd always admired in Dad. His reputation can handle the truth, Rebecca. Can yours? She stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible in her eyes. Finally, her shoulders slumped slightly. Fine, she spat. Keep the house. Keep your little victory, but don't think this means you've won. I already have, I said simply. I won the moment Dad saw you for who you really are. She turned and stormed back to her car, her heels sinking into the grass with each angry step. As she drove away, I noticed she dropped the lawyer's letter in the garden. Picking it up, I smoothed out the crumpled paper. The legal language was complex, but the message was clear. Rebecca had no claim to the house, had never had any claim to it, and her attempt to sell it constituted fraud. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Harrison. How did she take it? About as well as we expected, I replied. But I think she's done. Your father would be proud, he wrote back. He always said you were stronger than anyone knew. I looked around the garden, at the roses Dad had tended so carefully, at the house he protected so thoroughly. He'd known this day would come, had prepared for it in ways I was only beginning to understand. Rebecca had thought she was teaching me a lesson about respect. Instead, she'd learned one about underestimating people, both the living and the dead. The weeks following Rebecca's confrontation brought unexpected changes. The house felt different somehow, lighter, as if a shadow had been lifted. I spent my evenings restoring rooms to their original state, undoing Rebecca's hasty modernization attempts. One evening, while sorting through boxes in Dad's study, I found a letter addressed to me in his familiar handwriting. The envelope was dated just days before his death. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Livy, if you're reading this, then everything has played out as I expected. Rebecca has probably tried to take the house by now, and you've learned of the trust arrangements I made with James. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I was alive. Rebecca was watching too closely, and I needed her to believe she had won. You see, I discovered her true nature about a year into our marriage, but by then she had already shown her hand. The mysterious illness that landed me in the hospital? Not so mysterious after all. I had James investigate the occasional dizzy spells, the confusion, the gradual weakening. Rebecca had been adding something to my evening tea. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to make it look like natural decline. I played along, let her think she was succeeding. Meanwhile, I made arrangements to protect you and everything we built together. This house isn't just a building, Livy. It's our legacy, every repair and restoration a memory we shared. I know it must have hurt, watching me seem to choose her over you those last few months. Please forgive me for that deception. I needed her to believe she had complete control so she wouldn't suspect what was coming. There's more you need to know. Check behind the loose brick in the study fireplace. I left something there for you. Remember, strength isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about patience, about waiting for the right moment to act. I love you, my darling girl. Dad. I sat there for a long time, tears falling onto the letter. Everything made sense now, his distant behavior in those final months, the cryptic conversations, the way he'd insisted on having tea alone with Rebecca every evening. Moving to the fireplace, I found the loose brick easily. Behind it was a small USB drive and another note. Show this to the police when you're ready. The drive contained videos from hidden cameras Dad had installed, footage of Rebecca adding something to his tea, of her secret meetings with other men, of her phone calls discussing her plans for after his death. He documented everything. My hands shaking, I called Mr. Harrison. James, I said when he answered, I found Dad's letter. And the drive. He was quiet for a moment. Are you ready to take the next step? I thought about it. The evidence on the drive was damning. Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. Rebecca wouldn't just lose her social standing. She faced serious criminal charges. Not yet. I decided. Let's keep it as insurance. For now, knowing we have it is enough. Your father said you'd say that. He replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He always said you had his sense of strategy. The next morning, a large envelope arrived from Rebecca's lawyer. Inside was a formal document relinquishing any claims to the house or my father's estate, along with a brief note. You win, Olivia. I'm leaving the state. Don't worry about hearing from me again. Just keep what you know to yourself. She'd found the cameras. Of course she had. She would have been searching the house for anything incriminating after our confrontation. The evidence on the drive was just backup. The threat of its existence was enough. I stood in Dad's study, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and felt a deep sense of peace. He had protected me one last time, taught me one final lesson about patience and strategy. The house remained as he'd wanted it, preserved, cherished, a testament to our bond. Rebecca's attempt to steal it had failed, just as her attempts to come between us had ultimately failed. In the garden, Dad's roses bloomed more beautifully than ever. I tended them carefully, honoring his memory in every flower that opened. Sometimes, while working among them, I could almost hear his voice. Remember, Livy, the strongest roots grow in silence, hidden from view until the right moment to bloom. He had been right, of course. Strength wasn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it was about waiting, watching, and letting people reveal their true nature. Rebecca had taught me about deception, about the masks people wear. But Dad had taught me something far more valuable: how to see through those masks, how to protect what matters most, and how to win without losing yourself in the process. The house stands, as it always has, a monument to love, patience, and justice served quietly but completely. And somewhere, I like to think Dad is smiling, knowing that his final lesson was well learned. As for the USB drive, it remains behind that loose brick, a silent guardian ensuring that some stories stay buried, at least for now. After all, as Dad always said, timing is everything.